Hey gang, so this will be the second time I'm recording this one. Like I said last week, for those of you that watched, I'm trying to get these done this week. I don't know if it's going to happen. Had some recording issues yesterday. I actually got this whole video done and then it would not upload. So this is take two. Um, Anyway, a couple of quick things while I got everybody on here. I was on the phone with Viv this morning. She called me asking about some of your books. Hopefully they're finding those today. She was looking for them. And then just kind of getting my input on a couple of things. I would like to be clear here in case I wasn't ahead of time. My biggest concern with Vivian is that if I am causing a problem in Mr. Young's class, I will not be doing these anymore. I don't want to cause any problems. I hope I'm not. I hope I haven't offended Mr. Young, and I hope I'm not giving you guys the idea of he can't do what he's supposed to be doing. All this is you guys know me. Some of you asked for help. That's in my nature. I know I'm not there, but I still feel like you guys specifically, nothing against the juniors, but y'all are still my students. I still want to see you have success in the exam. I'd still like to see you graduate the whole 9 yards. So it's in my nature to try to help you, as long as my help is not hurting anything, okay? I'm also not trying to step on any toes. I just figure if maybe I can give you some stuff to kind of accelerate, or even if all this is study material, that's my purpose here. But like I said, I spoke with Vivian this morning. She made sure that she didn't feel I was stepping on any toes and all that. So as long as these aren't a problem, I'm happy to continue to do them. And again, as long as you guys want them. If this is a waste of your time, you're not getting anything out of this, then somebody let me know and I'll save myself some time and all that. I don't get paid to teach you anymore. I'm doing it out of the kindness of my heart. But all joking aside, like I said, I want to be clear. I'm just trying to help. I remember how hard it is to take on an IB class in your first year. It doesn't matter how much training you have. There is a massive learning curve. So anything I can do to help, I want to do that. All right, that being said, I'm trying to remember where I was, because I said I've already done this video once, so hopefully this isn't too repetitive. We covered, hey, computer, go back. It doesn't want to go back. Yep, okay, going the wrong way. Thank you. Covered the economic stuff last time. So we're talking about the rise of the authoritarian states, rise of Nazi Germany, right? Remember, like I was saying in the last video, IB history breaks it down for authoritarian states: rise, consolidation, and then policies, aims, or results of policies, however you want to phrase that, right? So with the Nazis, they are the easiest of the three that we typically teach at OHS, in the sense that they have a very clearly defined time period for rise. Most authoritarian states do, and then some other things are fuzzy. But 1919 to 1933 is the Nazi rise to power. So I'm going to finish that today, and then we'll see if I got time. I'll start another video on consolidation of power. Sorry, getting a text message here. Okay, so the basic idea: Germany's in this economic despair. On top of all that, the European perception of what to do with Germany is very, very different. France hates Germany for good reason. I don't know if you guys remember this, but it's part of the AP World curriculum back in the day. But there is something called the Franco-Prussian, no, not Franco-Prussian, yeah, Franco-Prussian War, that's right, in 1870 and 1871, where Prussia, which was the biggest state in what was not Germany yet. Germany doesn't become unified until 1871 after that war, but the biggest state that the Kaiser is going to come from is Prussia. So Prussia invades France, starts a war, kind of beats the pants off of France, realistically, and takes Alsace and Lorraine. Those are two regions of France that are taken by the Prussians/Germans after that Franco-Prussian War. And then you get into, 40 years later, World War I. Yes, France will get Alsace and Lorraine back. When we did our Treaty of Versailles simulation last year, hopefully remember that coming up, but that was a big sticking point for France. But the point here is, France is really pissed at Germany because Germany has fought 2 consecutive wars in the span of 40 years. I mean, 40 years is a decent chunk of time, but you got French people that were alive and very much a part of the Franco-Prussian War, and then very much alive and aware of what's going on with the First World War, might even have been involved in both of them. It's not outside the realm of possibility given the scope of the First World War. So France wants to punish Germany as much as possible. France would be fine if Germany just stopped existing. The English and us, the U.S., we're kind of an extension of their thought process, don't think this is a good idea, essentially creating an economic black hole in Europe would be what you would accomplish if you got rid of Germany. Germany, as I was saying in the last video, it's centrally located. It's got a lot of natural resource, but it's also kind of a trading hub. It's a crossroads of Europe. So crushing it economically, all that's going to do is have a negative impact on the European economy. So the Treaty of Versailles, obviously France gets more of what it wants. A very punitive treaty, very harsh on Germany. It's going to allow for a lot of not just money to be taken from Germany, but natural resources. And of course, you think about trying to rebuild after a war, particularly the scope of the First World War. You're going to need lumber and coal and material, iron, things to make steel with. You've got to rebuild infrastructure. And Germany desperately needs that, and France is going to want a lot of that. So there's a lot of conflicting ideas here. And what ends up happening is Germany is required to pay timber and coal, pay part of its reparations through timber and coal to France. It doesn't, partially because it didn't have enough. And the reason it didn't have enough is because it's trying to make sure that it's keeping, people in Germany warm and fed and those kind of things. So what ends up happening is something we call the Ruhr crisis, R-U-H-R. And I'm going to skip ahead one. I'll come back to those notes real quick, but just for a little bit of geography, because I remember you guys are great at this, right? But there you see Germany in red. The Rhine River is the natural border between France and Germany, still is today. So with the Treaty of Versailles, the Rhine became demilitarized, so it was a buffer zone, right? No German troops there. The French tended to encroach on that, which they weren't supposed to, but they were the winners and they were pissed at Germany, so they did it anyway. But the Ruhr, that little yellow region there, it was occupied after the war. Oh, excuse me. It's a center of, try that sentence again. It's a center of coal production and some lumber. So because it's occupied and because the Germans have defaulted on the payments, the French felt they had a right to take the Ruhr, right? You won't give us our coal and timber, we will take the land from you. Hence, we have the crisis in the Ruhr. So this is it's bad. We almost got to World War II right here, okay? The French, Belgian allies are going to take the Ruhr. The Germans are not going to play nicely. It's really kind of fascinating because France kind of had every right. I don't know about every right. France had a reasonable reason to do what they were doing, but the Germans responded with, "No, you're taking our stuff. We didn't sign up for this. Yes, we made bad decisions in the First World War, but we're trying to atone for them, and you don't have the right to do this. It's illegal." So German workers, as you can see right here, destroyed stuff. I mean, they engaged in what can be described as domestic terrorism, blew up mining facilities, destroyed factories, trashed goods, and it was kind of that, if you're not going to let us use it for German stuff, then you can't have it. And they destroyed things. Pretty crazy. The government itself, the Weimar government, and a quick note here, I can't remember if I mentioned it in the last one, so I want to make sure I say it here. The Weimar government, Weimar Germany is the name for Germany between the First and the Second, well, not even the First and Second World, it's between the First World War and 1933 when the Nazis take power. So Weimar is a city in Germany. The W makes a V sound, so Weimar. So if you use terminology, and this is a big thing in IB history, really IB essays, is using terminology correctly and showing that you have a complete understanding of stuff. So you refer to the interwar period as Weimar Germany or the Weimar Republic. So in the Weimar Republic, the government was faced with this really lousy choice. They can support the Germans who are destroying German stuff so that the French/Belgians don't get it. That's not going to come with any positive consequences. Or they can condemn the violence and support the French, which is not going to have any positive consequences. If you're familiar with the fall of the Qing dynasty, and the reason I bring this up is it's a really interesting corollary, and it's also almost in the same time period. The Qing dynasty collapses in China in 1911, so this is a little more than a decade later. But right before the collapse, they had the Boxer Rebellion, which you had to back up another 10 years, so 20 years before this. But you had the Boxer Rebellion where the Chinese peasants were resisting European imperialism and fighting against that. And you had the Empress of the Qing dynasty who could either support her literally unarmed peasants who were fighting European armies, or she could betray the Chinese to the Europeans who were trying to destroy her culture. So she sided with the Chinese, and then the Chinese government ends up collapsing within a decade. So an interesting corollary there. The Weimar government is faced with almost the same situation. Support our people, lose country. Support, the other side, lose faith from our people. So they chose their people, so yay for them. Printed more money, we get more of that hyperinflation. It just becomes really, really bad. The thing that saves this situation is the British and the United States, okay? Even though the French were our allies, we stepped up, condemned their actions, said what they're doing is aggressive in nature. This goes against the spirit of Versailles, the League of Nations, even though the United States is not a part of the League of Nations, and really calmed things down by putting hard economic pressure. And the United States was in a position to put strenuous pressure on the French. You have to understand, during the First World War, we loaned them a lot of money. We loaned the British stuff too, the Lend-Lease program, but we supported the French financially a lot during the war, which means they owed us a lot of money. Now, they want to be able to pay us back, and part of the reason they're attacking the Ruhr is so they can pay us back. But the United States, because we have that economic leverage on them, we're able to convince them to stop, because if they don't stop, then we can call in our loans, and that cripples their economy, and da-da-da-da-da. So what I'm saying here is cooler heads did prevail. But what we're getting at with the crisis in the Ruhr crisis, is that tensions in Europe were extraordinarily high after the war. People didn't just calm down. You've got the end of the war, you've got the Versailles Conference, don't forget you have the Spanish influenza, I didn't even put it in the notes here. But things are not great with the hyperinflation and all that stuff. All that stuff in the United States and everywhere else. Okay, if my computer will hello? There it goes. Don't know what it's doing. It's sleepy like me. So, in the end, we come up with something that you have two names for it: Locarno Treaty, which is the more formal name, or simply Locarno Spring. Locarno Spring is a much better name for this time period, just because it really has that sense of what's going on. Sorry. Fighting a cold. You should have heard me yesterday. It was way more gross. This is the better version. Maybe that's why I didn't save, because it just screencast if I thought I was being too nasty. Trying to get this out of the way there. So, Gustav Stresemann, maybe not a name you have to know. Never hurts to know an extra name, because again, the difference, especially when you look at the mark schemes in the IB essays, is when you're talking like 10 to 12 and 13 to 15, a lot of times it's just the nature, the nuance, the details that gets those really high-end scores. So it never hurts to know a name like Stresemann. But he was the Chancellor of the Weimar Republic. He is going to acquiesce to French pressure, but again, the French are having that pressure put on by the United States. So it's going to be less than, hey, you have to give us all this coal. So a couple of decisions are made in the Locarno Treaty. Number one, right here, Germany agrees to abide by its new borders. It had been fuzzy on that for a little bit. It does agree to the new western borders, the Rhine River, the demilitarized zone, something called the Saarland, which if you watch Triumph of the Will that I mentioned in the last video, you'll see that as well. But France also had to agree to a payment schedule which they would work on, so Germany could pay its debt without destroying its own economy. Okay, so what ends up happening here is we have this cheesy line right here: for the first time since the end of the war, Europe looked to be healing. But it's true, hence the name Locarno Spring, right? Rebirth, things are getting better, there's growth, all that good stuff. So the depression that's going on in Europe is going to lessen, not go away. The hostility is going to lessen, not go away. In fact, when you get to 1925, the only one who's really, really been out of shape over all this is the Soviets. They thought what was going on in Germany was the beginning of what Marx described as the proletarian revolution, because it was workers, right? Workers rising up, destroying things. The Soviets really thought that Germany was about to go full-on communist, and they were about to have their next natural ally. So needless to say, when it all got settled, the Soviets were not happy. Nobody cared, because the Bolsheviks were still relatively unknown and not understood, and they withdrew from World War I, and then they'd been fighting in their own civil war for a couple of years. In 1924-25, you've got the death of Lenin and Stalin's rise and Trotsky, so nobody likes the Soviets, but they were upset. Also worth noting here, you notice Germany never agreed to its new eastern borders, so there was never a fixed point for Germany's eastern borders. That's going to be important later on when we talk about the consolidation of power and policies of the Nazis, because they're going to use that to justify expanding east, because their borders are different. I'm going to pause this real quick, and I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, trying to deal with like 7 things at once. As usual. All right. So, short version of the story here is the European economy / European political situation stabilizes a little bit. It's still very, very, very bad. And I want to reiterate what I said earlier in the last video, I think, or I said yesterday, and it's not in that video. People don't typically look to radical political organizations when your country is stable and you have a healthy economy, okay? It's a trend that we see throughout all of I wouldn't say all of human history, but certainly modern industrial history with these kind of modern post-Enlightenment governments. Very seldom do people turn to radical political solutions when things in their country are stable, okay? And I use the example all the time of, if you look at modern U.S. politics, and I say modern, like the last 10 to maybe 20 years, 15 years, say what you want about particularly Obama or Trump, okay? And you can throw Biden in there too, you can do a little bit of Bush, but really if we just look at Obama and Trump, both have had 2 terms. I know Trump's not finished with this. Like them, hate them, love them, leave them, whatever, either side of the aisle. If you really look at this, neither one of these are normal run-of-the-mill politicians. Now, I would argue that Trump is further radicalized than Obama was, but also the situation has changed since Obama's time period. And in 2008, Obama was fairly far left, especially in comparison to where some of the other presidents were. What I'm saying is it's a glimpse that in recent years, most Americans have been disaffected with our economic situation, with our political situation, so we've looked towards more polarizing, even though they're not really polar, as in on the radical left or the radical right. Yeah, my right and your left. Even if they're not truly there, they're more polarizing figures, right? I don't know if you guys watched the news, but the election last night, particularly the New York City mayor, this guy that was elected is a Democratic socialist, openly, like loves Bernie Sanders, talks about all kinds of stuff, and he's got some far left views, some far left views. And I don't know anything about the guy. I'm not living in New York City. I have no idea if this is indicative or anything, but it does tell me that this is, again, to some extent, it's got to be a reaction to the far right, so we tend to go far left. All the reason I'm bringing that up is when you look at what's going on in Europe in the 1930s, or China in the 1940s and 50s, or Cuba in the 1950s, these authoritarian states, these radical governments don't just appear, okay? The situation has to be primed for them to kind of rise, and that's what you want to fixate on when you talk about rise to power of authoritarian states. So I would argue that when we're talking about this slide right here in front of you, this is really, really important because Germany is an all-time low at the end of the First World War. Just in every way, shape, or form, their country has never been in a situation like that before. Politically, economically, the Kaiser's gone. Who's in charge? We've got this new government. We're war reparations, yada, yada, yada. Things are bad, and then things are bad, and then things are bad, and things are bad. And here's what happens. In 1924, 1925, 1926, Germany starts to get a little bit of hope, okay? So while they might have been looking at some more radical elements of the government, they are getting just that sliver of hope that maybe things are going to get better. And I think that's so important to talk about because when the U.S. stock market crashes in 1929, it absolutely guts not just us, but the global economy, which would include Germany. So you're Germany, you're here, you're at an all-time low, and then you've got to this high, made up that much ground, and then all of a sudden everything is pulled out from under you. You actually feel lower than your lowest point before. It's like, you're emotionally traumatized, and then you begin to trust again, and you have hope in some person that there's goodness, humanity, and they turn out to be a scumbag too. Like, it's that kind of stuff. So, yeah, the European, the damage done to Europe by the stock market crash in 29 is really the thing that is going to be pushing the Nazis over the edge. Okay. I don't know why I apologize for a pause. It's not like you guys are sitting there waiting on me. I do it when I was recording my UTB classes anyway. We got an offer on the house. We're still trying to sell this thing. I'm answering text my wife. I'm trying to eat my apple and talk to you guys all at once. And anywho, what else is new? How you guys doing? Miss you guys. Hope you're all right. Email me sometime. Let me know how you're going. How you're going. Where you're going. What schools you're going to. All that fun stuff. Okay. So a little bit more on Germany. It hits its high point in 26. Okay, kind of on what I was saying on the last slide. Things get better 24, 25 through 6. So 24, you have the Dawes Plan. 25, you have the Locarno Treaty. And 26, Germany is admitted to the League of Nations. So there's a few small things that work in Germany's favor, enough to give them that glimmer of hope. And like I said, then the hammer comes down in 29 and just guts them, right? The United States was responsible because of this Dawes Plan. And just pay attention to this right here. The United States was loaning money to Germany. It was loaning money to Germany to help rebuild its infrastructure, and therefore Germany could pay its reparations payments to France, and France was using that money in part to pay back its loans to the United States. So I know that seems weird. When I first learned this, to me, it sounded like we were giving money to Germany so that France could give it back to us. And this is where you truly need somebody who's better at economics than me to explain this to you. But my limited economic knowledge, heck, you guys may be better in economics and explain this to me better. But my limited economic knowledge is basically, if you look at it as an investment, we put X amount of dollars into Germany and we get X plus Y amount of dollars from France. So even though we are the ones investing it, we're getting more in a return. So it helps stimulate the economy so that in the end the United States does profit and gets more of that money back from France. That's the way I understand it. But of course, when the U.S. economic bubble collapses, we're not putting any money into Germany. Germany's economy collapses. Germany doesn't pay France. France's economy collapses. France doesn't pay us. Our collapsed economy gets worse. Hoovervilles, Dust Bowl, food bread lines, food lines, all that good stuff. So, very bad. It's a very technical term. Very, very bad. Okay. I thought I got rid of that slide. Don't worry about that slide. Don't worry about that. Look at this. This is really, really cool. I want to set this up so that you guys understand what you're looking at here, because it just looks like a little spreadsheet, because it's a little spreadsheet. But this is some really cool research. Wait, come back. No, sorry. I want this thing to move. There we go. Get that out of the way so you can see all of it. Okay, this is a neat bit of research. Not touch anything else. You guys miss my technological woes, don't you? So, I was saying this is a neat piece of research. Dr. Roland Spickerman over at UTB put this together. Like a good IB teacher, a good IB student, I want to cite my sources. So this is his research. He showed this to me as a student, not me, to a class I was in as a student when I was an undergrad back in, 2002 or 3, long time ago. And then he actually brought it back for a graduate course I had in, 2009 or 10, a long time ago. But anyway, when I started teaching, I remembered this, and I asked him if I could borrow it, and he was happy to share it with me and said, feel free to use it with anything you want. So I actually used to use this in 8th grade when I was trying to explain how a parliament works, because I'm a nerd and I will use this to explain anything I want. But when I started teaching IB, this became so invaluable, so it's so neat to be able to share this with you. All that being said, like I said, I want to set this up. This is years of research condensed in a one-page spreadsheet. I know it doesn't necessarily look like much more than numbers, but this is a lot of research and a lot of very high-level academics when you look at history. So what Dr. Spickerman was looking at is the Weimar Coalition in that. So a couple things you need to understand if you're not familiar with parliamentary systems. So in the United States, we've got a two-party system. Somebody has the majority and somebody's the minority, and that's really it. We've got some other parties, but for the most part, when it comes to federal election, they don't really matter. It's just the reality of it, okay? In most parliamentary systems across the world, you very seldom have a party that controls the majority. And it does happen from time to time, and it happens in some countries and not others, and it can come and go and all this stuff. But for the most part, you don't have one party that controls the majority. So what ends up happening is you have the party that has the most votes, and they will work to form what's called a coalition, so a group of other parties that they're willing to compromise with And from there, you get a majority, you have a coalition government, and that's how you govern. And then what happens is, as your coalition fragments or breaks or hits a stalemate, it breaks apart, and you usually have more elections. You try to elect a new government, so forth and so on. And that's the parliamentary process here. So what you're looking at is between 1919 and 1932, the elections that lead from the end of World War I up until the election of the Nazis. I'll reemphasize that later, but remember, the Nazis were elected. So what you have here is the highlighted stuff as the coalition, the Weimar Coalition. So these are the groups that were ruling Weimar Germany. And you can see he did this on kind of a left-right spectrum, very traditional. I know last week we talked about that y-axis, economic issues, social issues, but for purpose of this spreadsheet, he just did it kind of very traditional, left-wing, right-wing. So what you see here is the coalition that ran Weimar Germany was a center-left group that did include some socialists over here, the Social Democrats, but not so much that include the communists. And then you have these right-wing and then ultra-right-wing groups, a la the Nazis, that were outside of the coalition. In fact, the truth is the Nazis weren't anything, right? They were formed in 1919. You notice they have 0 seats in the Reichstag, which is the German parliament. They're not on the political map at the national level at all. They are a small fringe party based out of Munich, which is the capital of Bavaria, which is a large southern state. It's the Texas of Germany. It's a large southern state. But they're a regional fringe party when they're formed. So you notice they have no traction in the government at all. Okay. So as elections go on here, and you can see it by number of seats and by percentage over here, or the big picture, what we call the Weimar Coalition and the anti-Weimar Coalition. So what you see is, as the 1920s go on, they start out with good because there wasn't much else. First real elections a little bit later, kind of got this split and all that. Right around here is where you see the Weimar Coalition lose its majority. Now, it can still govern because you notice the anti-group, the ones that are grouped against them and unified against them, still have a smaller number. That, of course, flips here, which is where you lose the Weimar Coalition and it falls apart. Now, you'll note real quick, the dates are 1930. So after the stock market crash, the Weimar Coalition also collapses as well. So there's a couple other things I want to draw your attention to. Nazis 0, Nazis 0, Nazis 32. So the question I would ask you is, how does a fringe, right-wing, regional, fanatical party go from no seats in the national election to 32 seats? Now, granted, if you look at percentage, we're still talking less than 7%. So they're still a small group, but they're there. Why did they go from nothing to something? And that shows you just how powerful certain events in history can be. 1923, the Nazis are going to stage a coup in Bavaria. I'll have this on some later slides, but we call it the Beer Hall Putsch or the Munich Putsch. Putsch is a coup in German. So essentially the Nazis, led by Hitler and a couple other guys, are going to try to overthrow the state government of Bavaria. They're going to succeed for a couple of hours. They hold a couple of government buildings and disrupt communication, so effectively, at the very least, Bavarian government is not in control. Maybe the Nazis are, maybe they're not. But ultimately, some troops move in, there's a bit of a firefight, some Nazis are killed, the rest are arrested. So this is where Hitler goes to jail. I'll talk more about that on the next slide. But what's interesting is that because they get national media attention, the Nazis and Adolf Hitler start to become household names. And this also goes back to what I was saying. People will vote for radical political ideologies, not necessarily because they always believe in it, but because their life is miserable. And this is 1924, right? This is right just after the peak of that hyperinflation. This is before the Dawes Plan is kicked in. This is, before the French have invaded. So things in Germany are really, really bad. And people start looking for alternatives to the far right and the far left. You'll notice the communists too, okay? 5%, but as things get really bad in Germany, they jump to 19%, 13%. So your two very ultra-polarizing parties, right and left-wing, are gaining traction in the early part of the 20s because people are looking for alternatives, right? Sure, are there going to be diehard communists and, diehard Nazis? Of course there are. But it's no different than, if you watch social media, you think about your kind of prototypical, stereotypical MAGA hat wearing person that you'll see on Instagram or Facebook Reel or TikTok. I don't watch TikTok, but I assume it's the same there. They're just they're the worst. It's like the dregs of our society spouting off just stupidity. That you just go, where do these people get this stuff from? And they're just repeating all the stuff we know is wrong. But was it 78, 80 million people voted for Trump? They're not all those red hat wearing cuckoo birds, right? There's some very sensible people vote, and that's what I'm getting at, is that while, there's going to be diehards on both sides, what ends up happening is in these bad situations, these tense situations, these situations where people are not happy with what's going on, they look for alternatives, and that's where you can turn to a Nazi, a communist, or, in New York City, a democratic socialist, or in the United States, not just a Republican, but the idea of a MAGA Republican. It shows that these people are disaffected or unhappy with their government, right? And the Nazis, because of their ridiculous coup, are able to get their name out there, get that 15 minutes of fame, national media attention, so people start voting for them. Now, you'll also note that number drops pretty quick. They get up to 32 and they go right back to 14 in the same calendar year. This is after the Dawes Plan. So this is pre-Dawes Plan, post-Dawes Plan. And once things in Germany start to get a little bit better, you'll notice that both the commies and the Nazis drop, right? Like I said, it's pretty cool research, right? If you like data, send Dr. Spickman an email. Say, thanks for letting us see your spreadsheet. So anyway, and the Nazis hold on. They do have that national media attention, so they're going to hang on for the next few years as this fringe party, but you can see over here 6%, 2%, 8%. But when the stock market collapses, again, notice the jump here. Communists, Nazis, and not only that, notice the conservatives. These guys would be considered ultra-right, the German People's Party, the National Volkspartei. What's going to happen is some of these seats are going to jump to the Nazis. Same thing here, is you're going to see some things on the left going further left, okay? But the Nazis go from 2% to 18%. And then as the Depression worsens, you'll notice they spike here at 230 seats, controlling almost 40% of the parliament. Okay, now they do settle into 30%, just over a third, but still, you notice nothing. It's a massive jump, and that coincides with the deepest parts of the Great Depression. Okay, and when you slap this on here, the anti-Weimar coalition outweighs the Weimar coalition. This is where you can actually see a breakdown. And formally in these last elections, the anti-Weimar coalition, led by the Nazis and the Conservative Party and some of these other right-wing parties, is able to put together a coalition and run the country, so thereby creating a new government. So the old chancellor is ousted. President von Hindenburg is able to put in a new chancellor, and because the Nazis held the largest parliamentary percentage, or largest number of seats, they get to put their leader of their party as the new chancellor. Hence, Adolf Hitler gets elected chancellor of Germany. So when you talk about rise to power, it's really important to look at all these different factors and see how they play off of each other. But yeah, the Nazis were elected. Now, this is also something I want to share, just because, it took me so long to get this. And it's actually just a simple question. I asked Dr. Spickerman, I think when I was still an undergrad, I hope it was as an undergrad. God, I hope I didn't ask this as a graduate student. But as an undergrad, I was like, so what about the elections during Nazi Germany, right? Where are the 33 to the 45 elections? And he just laughed, and looked and smiled, and chuckled until I got it that, well, it's an authoritarian state. One of the characteristics of authoritarian states are fraudulent elections, or simply no elections. There is no election data because the Nazis stopped having elections after 1933, which goes in part with their consolidation of power. Okay? All right. So, I've got just a couple minutes. I can get this done and hopefully get this uploaded and sent off to you guys here. So, the beer hall putsch, right? November 8th and 9th. And remember those dates. Those are going to become special dates for the Nazis. But Hitler and his cronies start a fight, mess up some stuff in the government, eventually get arrested. You can see here he gets sentenced to 5 years in prison, only serves 9 months. A couple of things about that. Number one, at the time, and this is common in Europe, also in the United States, we had two almost different systems of justice, right? There was political prisoners and criminal prisoners. So political prisoners got lighter sentences, even though they might do something violent. Like, people died in this beer hall putsch. But Hitler only gets 5 years for it because it was seen as a political crime, which was different than a regular violent crime. And after 9 months, he's let out. And of course, we sit here and look back on this, and you're like, why? But the reality is, this is 1924. And I can't remember if he's let out late 24, early 25, but he's not worth keeping in prison. He is a relatively, he had a 15 minutes of fame. He's a flash in the pan, a firework, or whatever you want to call him. But the German authorities don't feel like it's worth keeping in prison. Why spend the money on that? And that he's not really a threat. Of course, you look back on that going, they should have just, I don't know, locked him up, hung him, something, but they didn't. And it would have made sense to keep him in prison at that point. So ultimately, they do let him out. Also, keep that in mind with Castro. You're going to see the same kind of thing later on down the road. So in his time in prison, and this both goes with rise to power and consolidation of power. You can even throw it in with policies, but more so rise to power and his consolidation. Hitler is going to write Mein Kampf. The original name for the book here, I don't want to put myself underneath Hitler. I guess I'm going to be underneath Hitler. The original name for the book is right down there at the bottom of the slide. 4.5 years of struggle against lies, stupidity, and cowardice, which is essentially what the mantra of IB students in high school, right? No. But that was the original title. His publisher thought that name was too lengthy, so it's condensed down to Mein Kampf, my struggle. He writes this book. It is, I know I've mentioned this before because we talked about Mouse last year. It's terrible. It's not very good. It's terrible and not very good. Yeah, it's a real good thing. It is more fiction than fact. But, and I say all this, like, if you went and read it, it is, and I have a copy in my room that, if we were doing this in class, I'd have read some passages. You can look at some things that he said, and of course look at the lens of the Holocaust and go, holy crap, he said these things, he was going to do it. But it's not really, like, there's no, we're going to build death camps and have Auschwitz in there. It's mostly his fairly fictitious account of the rise of the Nazi Party, which is mostly inaccurate. Some ranting about why the Germans lost the First World War, which is very anti-Semitic in nature, and then some ideas for the future. But it's not well written, and it's more fiction than fact. But it is a book that gets written, it gets published. Now, here's the thing, is that a lot of people don't read it in 1925 because why would you, right? Mein Kampf becomes a much bigger deal after the Nazis take power and Adolf Hitler goes into the chancellorship, and then the government starts buying these books and disseminating all that. People start reading going, oh, so I think we tend to make a bigger deal out of Mein Kampf than it really is because, like I said, you read it through the lens of history and go, but taken at the time it's written, like, it's like when I was in graduate school and I read High Noon in Southern Africa, which is Chester Crocker's autobiography. Why would anybody need to read Chester Crocker's autobiography? Well, in 1925, who would need to read Hitler's autobiography? It's about the same. Chester Crocker is the longest-serving Undersecretary of State for African Affairs. Unless you're doing research on it, you don't need to read his book. It's not that good either. But the joke being, like, in 1925, like, Hitler was Chester Crocker. Like, who is he, right? So, that's it. So, Nazis in the 30s. All right, cool. That's as far as I'm going to get. I got to go get Lucy. So, when his rise to power comes to the end of his election. So, the next video, I'll get into the Enabling Act. We'll talk about breakdown of the Nazi Party. I got a bunch of slides on how the Nazis structured their movement, which is really interesting and layered. Maybe as early as tomorrow I can get to that. Ooh, no, I think I got a meeting tomorrow, but maybe Friday or later today or something like that. Try to get you guys another one. Hopefully this one will save, and I'm not going to have to make this recording for a third time. Hey, as always, if you guys have questions about this stuff, please ask. If there's anything you think I could be doing to make this a little bit more helpful, better, let me know. Like I said, you got my email. If you don't, Sam, Andy, and Jade have it. Let them know. Shoot me an email. I'll be happy to hear from all you guys. Also, if we're getting into colleges and stuff, let me know, because it's always cool to hear from you guys, okay? I will talk to everybody later. Where's my stop button?